from across the globe, from the centre of aerospace. And now to you.
Thank you for downloading the Aero Society podcast from the Royal Aeronautical Society.
So thank you for inviting me here tonight to share my little hobby or obsession with you. I've been in this game for about 2 years now, and it's totally changed my entire life, really. Let's crack on. So, a bit about me. I lived in Bognor Regis my whole life. I've always been around that area. I've always had interest in funny technologies and building my own things, really getting hands-on and practical. I'm quite a keen cyclist, or at least used to be, so that's the link with the cycling, human-powered side of things. My professional history, worked for British Airways, obviously. Not sure how that end picture there got in there, but I've type certification on 777s and 787s, and I work turnarounds here at T5. Before that, I worked for Virgin Atlantic, did my apprenticeship with them, and prior to that, I studied at Northbrook College at Shoreham Airfield. So, the Bognor Birdman. This is my gateway into the human-powered world. Lots of bizarre people in this sort of little community, all find their own way in there somehow. But this is my route. It's a bit of an unorthodox one. But Bognor Birdman itself is a hell of a competition. It runs every year, or has been on and off for the past God knows how long. So, since 1971, in fact, so it's the oldest Birdman event in the world. The way they work it, they divide it down into 3 classes. So you've got the charity event, the Kingfisher class, which is mainly fun jumpers. It's great to watch, not so great to be part of. The more serious hang gliders, the Condor class. They also run modified hang gliders with winglets and other things, but they are restricted to the 30-foot wingspan, so 9.1 meters. So they're limited in that respect. And the Leonardo da Vinci class, the home-built machines, that is my category. That's what I really love and enjoy. And every year when I went as a child, I would watch that category with my eyes wide open, because it's where all the innovations and interesting machines come from. Because everyone thinks of human-powered flight and flying machines in a different way, and they've all got their own ideal machine. So that is, for me, the best event. So early 2016, I made the plunge, and I decided to give it a crack, build my own Leonardo da Vinci class aircraft and fly it in the competition. So I had to really think about it. And I looked back at what the past entrants, saw what worked, what really didn't work. There were a lot of failures, don't get me wrong. But the considerations I had to make were mainly space. I've only got a single carport garage in which I could build it. So I had to really be creative with how I use the space. Money, so I'm funding it myself. I had no outside sponsorship. So that was a real restriction, because you couldn't go straight in carbon spars, bit of an issue. So I had to be quite creative with the materials I used to produce it. And obviously the time factor. I work a full shift. I've got family responsibilities. So I was limited in that respect. But the first year I entered was the first year that they removed the wingspan limit for the Leonardo da Vinci class aircraft. So that really opened the door to possibility of having sustained human-powered flight, which is, my mind exploded when I heard that. I was all geared up for a limited wingspan, limited potential, but as soon as I heard that, my ears pricked up and I was good to go. So during my initial investigation into the world of sort of human-powered flight, I came across this fantastic website here, Chris Roper's website, and it basically gives you a blueprint of how to build the perfect human-powered aircraft. It wouldn't have happened without that website. I'll rave about that all the way through the presentation, because it is really fantastic. So here's some examples of human-powered flight. There's a variety up here. You've got Daedalus up here in the corner. That holds the current world record for distance. I believe it's 77 miles. So it's a fair distance. And here are some of the British attempts. But we'll go to the next slide for that. Okay, so a brief history for those of you that don't know about human-powered flight, and its broad spectrum of achievements, really. So the first flight was carried out just down the road here at Lasham Airfield in 1961. So it's some time ago. When you think carbon fibre wasn't really developed back then, they had to really be creative with the materials. I believe it was totally wooden construction. So that's, back in the day, it must have been a hell of an achievement to see that fly. Moving slightly further onwards, so 1977, the Gossamer Condor II flew the first figure of 8 to take the Kramer Prize, the very first one. The Kramer Prizes, run by yourselves, I believe. They award pioneers in the field of human-powered aircraft. I'll just mention them now because I will tuck into them a bit later on in the presentation. 1979, the Gossamer Albatross, so the sort of the Mark III of the Condor, flew across the Channel, did 22 miles in 2 hours 49 minutes, and that was a really interesting achievement. They've got a whole documentary-length film on it. It's absolutely fantastic. If you get a chance to watch it, it's all on YouTube, and that was a real inspiration for me to step up and give it a crack. And then, obviously, I already mentioned 1988, very good year, that year of my birth. They flew the maximum distance of 77 miles, which was across the Aegean Sea. So, as I said, going to research, mainly this incredible website. It really was of benefit to me. Loads of links and additional information on there. The MIT Daedalus, NASA got involved with that as well. So it had a huge amount of funding. They had pilots that would train on and off, so all of the cycling power was ready to go when they needed it. It's an incredible achievement. And then the Birdman of Japan, they really are a step above us in terms of basic achievement, really. These guys do well over 20 kilometers, just you know, and think it's nothing. So it's very impressive. And I know the British Human-Powered Flying Club, that I'll go into a bit later on, they were invited to go and give that a crack. Well, if I'm honest, I don't think we're quite there yet, but maybe one day. So I've not made a mistake on this slide. This was my design slide, and I'm thinking long and hard of what I was going to put on this slide. But truth be told, pen never touched paper when I was building my first one. I never did any scribblings or anything. It was all sort of just crack on and build it. So I was getting stuck in the workshop in my garage. Rather than drawing things, I just, for some reason, just built it, and it just came out of nothing. So I'm going to go through how I built it, the materials I used in my initial Zephyrus. That's the name of my aircraft, if you didn't already assume that. So starting with the wing, I kept it very basic. I'd never built an aircraft before, not even a model aircraft, to be honest with you. So I wasn't sure of what to use. I had all these great resources, but not necessarily the foresight or skill to interpret all the information correctly. So I kind of just went for it. So Clark Wire is an airfoil. Looking back, hindsight, very poor decision. I mean, it worked, but there are much better airfoils out there. I kept it fairly small, so a span of 19 meters, surface area of 20 square meters. There's a calculator on the Chris Roper website, and that really does hammer through the efficiency. They call it the power calculator. It just draws back all the wing loadings and everything else. So the math side of it was mainly done on online calculators. I mean, I'm much more of a practical kind of guy. I can look at something and tell you if it'll work or not, but I'm not so great on the formula side. So just going through it then, we had, it was a modular type design. So I had 5 sections of wing. There was a 1 meter joiner in the center, which was attached to the fuselage, and 4.5 meter sections that would clip into that, which making a total span of 20 meters. So it was quite large, really, and it did engulf my entire road at one point. So yeah, interesting. So the skin I used for this was mylar. I found a company up north that sells it in massive rolls, but they're only 90 centimeters wide. So I was quite limited in that respect. So I decided to go for a thicker leading edge skin, as I had no capping. It was just the naked ribs there. So I went for 150 micron skin on the leading edge, and then the 125 micron on the trailing. I mention that because it's important in my second build. It's definitely one of the mistakes I made. So in the pictures, what you're looking at here is this is one wing, see with a tapered tip here. These are all the jigs I made to produce the outer tips. That was very time consuming. I had to cut all them by hand, make sure they were all correct, print out all the sizes off the web. Here we've got my garage all squeezed in there nicely. I had to hang the wing off the ceiling to make sure it all fit. And here's just the outer ribs preparing to be cut with the rib strengtheners there. The rib strengtheners and the outer two ribs were made of plywood I bought from Wicks. So 3.5mm plywood, just standard, just cut it on my router. I mean, it wasn't ideal material, but it was cheap, accessible, and it worked absolutely brilliantly. So moving on to the fuselage. To keep it as simple as possible, as I said, I never built one of these before. I never built anything this large before. So I decided to keep it very, very simple. And the simplest way I could think of doing that is to keep everything box section, because it's easily attached to itself, easily cut, easily machined. So I went with box section. And it turned out pretty well. So I just used the box section. I used aluminium plates. And this aluminium, it wasn't special aluminium. It's just standard building. I think it's 2000 series. I'm not even totally sure. So it's really not high-spec aviation aluminium. It was just the basic material I could get my hands on. And the end picture here, you can see the fuselage completed, nearly, with the prop attached to it. Okay, so my control surfaces on Mark I Zephyrus. Probably the weakest section of the whole machine, if I'm totally honest. I used control cables as a method of controlling them. The surface area in relation to the rest of the fuselage, the wing, the centre of gravity, was all a total guess. I had no idea what I was doing. It was more how it looked. So I think in that respect, it was a fairly good guess. And the actual strength of it was made up of the styrofoam, and I had a fiberglass tape resin on there. And that was actually fairly secure, so I'm quite happy with how that turned out. Okay, the propeller. I'm pretty happy with how the propeller turned out. So again, on the Chris Roper website, it gives you a link to this fantastic program up in the top right-hand corner. It is fantastic. It's very basic, but it gives you everything you need to know. It's a prop designer, and you bung in the information you have, the chord, the size of the prop, the airspeed, the RPM, and it fires out the perfect design for a propeller, and it's ideal. It gives you all the efficiencies lined out, so I could really accurately predict my cadence that I'd have to cycle at, the airspeed that I'd have to achieve. With the other calculators online, the power calculator, I knew the required airspeed, so I could pretty accurately guesstimate that prop was efficient. And although this aircraft was totally inefficient, given the weight, the materials, my first attempt, I did overestimate the amount of power required. So I put it at about 700 watts to maintain steady flight. So to put that into perspective, to cycle at 20 miles an hour on a standard road bike is about 200 watts. So whether I'm even able to hit the 700 watt mark, I'm not sure. So it was a bit of a shot in the dark. Again, it's just for Birdman, I gave it a crack. And it turned out very well. So the chain drive system, I had a standard bicycle chain that came up from the main centre drive. It twisted through 90 degrees, and I was really concerned that was going to come off immediately. But it was very secure and held on very well. Geared for 110 RPM. It worked out about 80% efficient at 500 watts. So the 500 watts mark was about my average, I guess, power output. And I had a spring tensioner device, so it kept the slack side nice and secure. So I've got a little video now, just to demonstrate. This is my friend Ed. He helped me out in the last few weeks. So here we go. You can see we were at tight space, so I had to do it in my front garden. It's very stable there, Ed. You can see the spring tensioner there as well. And we'll come back to that. So there we are. Thank you, Ed. Right, the finished product. So this bottom picture here was coming up to about 9:30 in the evening. this was the first time it had ever gone together. It takes a very long time to build an aeroplane, and I didn't really anticipate the amount of time it was going to take. So it was a bit of a frantic rush at the end there. Like skidding the wing was the biggest issue. It really did sap the time. It's more of a three-man job as well. So I had to wait for other people to be available. So I was pretty tight on getting it ready for the big day. But it was ready. So you can see here on the pier, it all looks fairly together and secure. We had a bit of an issue with the flying controls when we were on the pier. Had a lot of flapping around up here with the rudder. Had big issues. And a friend of mine, Scott Wallace, then I'll tuck into him a bit later on, he really helped me out. He cut the top of the rudder off and put it as a tab on the front. That really helped things out. Aerodynamically balanced, it was much better. So again, that was a big error I made. But on the day, it was ready and we were good to go. The wing tie setup, so you can see here the tie supporting the main lift load of the wing, was again total guesswork on the day. I had the material I was using as the bracing was very high tensile strength fishing line. Unfortunately, I wasn't anticipating the amount of stretch that gives you. So you set it and it stretches about 20% more than you anticipate. So again, that was somewhere I could have improved on. So, should we see it fly?
Held by pedal power, it has a prop, and this craft is enormous.
They all say.
And just to add excitement, we have a koala coming up the pier. And as you know, koalas have got this habit. Here we go!
So yeah, what do you think of that? Didn't go too badly, did it? Lost control at the end there a little bit. So let's go into what actually went wrong. Oh, stand by. There we go. So what we learned from that, the main issue is get someone who can fly a plane, I think. Having never flown anything before, the sensation of rolling off a pier and not falling was bizarre. So, big one, needed to have a test flight. That's the main thing that we needed to have. Just to get everything set up, see the weak points, understand what could have gone wrong on the day. Would have massively increased. I think we could have gone 4 times the distance we did. We achieved 25.2 metres, I think. Sorry, 35 metres. But to be honest with you, I was over the moon that it flew, but I was a bit disappointed that we didn't get a little bit further. So test flight was the biggest point there. The pre-flight issues we had. If you look at the end picture there, to the right, can you see my control stick hanging down from the centre of the fuselage there? See how far back that is, set to nose up? And it's a fairly neutral, nearly neutral, control position. So on the day, obviously it was all rigging up last minute. So had that been rigged up slightly, so that control stick was 20 centimetres further forward, I might have had a bit more range to be able to pull out of that dive. But there we go, you live and learn. Also, we had a lot of boom flex, which again doesn't help the control surface and feel. So a lot of that was lost in the boom flex, and also I had the fishing wire as control cable, so I could have done all this, but it would have been a massive delay on the actual input. In terms of the designing issues, so the built-in problems, we'll cross out the tail wings, I just mentioned that. The wing leading edge, you can see in this image here, this is after it's been shrunk. We've got terrible creasing, which again wasn't too much of an issue on the day, but it eats into your efficiency big time. This front 20%, as I'm sure you all know, this front 20% of the wing is the critical area for producing lift. So any deformations of the aerofoil in that area will really cut down on your efficiency. And that was really what I was trying to get away from. So that was a big issue. The wing trailing edge. Best one to look at is top right here. You see the wavy compression on the trailing edge, and again in this picture here. What I didn't anticipate was the compression felt of the trailing edge. When you set the incidence on the wing, the tips want to rock backwards. And again, with the oncoming headwind, the wings will try to drag backwards. and you have that movement around the vertical axis, and that puts a massive compressive load on that trailing edge. So I had to find a way around that in the next build as well, because that was a big issue. We had breakages. This trailing edge is only made up of the plywood from wicks, so it wasn't ideal, and it did break in a few spots. It didn't affect the flight so badly, but it would have been nice to have that correct. The control cables, as I mentioned, and the control surfaces, they were hideously too small. No real purchase. If you look at the video again and again, you can see it flapping all over the place. Very little purchase on the air. So they could have been bigger, really. Right, so following that flight, I've got a Facebook page called Zephyrus, which is where I put all of my ongoing build updates and achievements and everything else on there. And on there, I started getting these likes from the British Human Powered Flying Club. They were created in 2014, and they try and promote the sport of human powered flight. Just up there is three of the, I'd say, the best in the country. I may have missed a couple out, but these are the three of the best that are currently flying with the British Human Powered Flying Club. You've got Betterfly, Aerocycle 3, and Airglow up there. And I recently went to Lasham Airfield and helped out with Aerocycle 3. I was just ground crew. It was incredible to see. Just took off and then flew about 1.5 kilometres effortlessly, and then just drifted down again. It was amazing to see, really, because I've always been dealing with 5- and 6-second flights, having seen one actually controllable and manageable, and I'm so close to achieving that, even with my backyard aluminium machine. This is top-end, 3rd generation carbon fibre design. So I was quite sort of humbled by seeing this and seeing how close it actually is. But these guys are fantastic. They've invited me along as an ongoing basis. They're very friendly and like-minded, so we could talk for hours. Right, so looking forward to Zephyrus II. That was this year's entrant. Again, I had similar restrictions, so space, money, and time. I left it a bit later, so time was a bit more of an issue for me. I had a few things to do after the first Birdman, after it engulfed my life. So I made the plunge again and committed another 6 months to getting one done. And the biggest objective, I think, was beat the Condors, because it would be really nice to sort of bow out of the Bognor Birdman competition, having achieved some mind-boggling distance that no one could possibly hope to achieve again. So I was hoping to, I put it right there, I said 2 kilometres. Let's do 2 kilometres off Bognor Pier, and I'll be happy with that. I can then bow down and walk away and be happy I've achieved. So starting off with the design side, increase the surface area. So we're going to go 28 metres. So it's a monster, absolutely huge. Because span is really, really important in terms of efficiency. You basically up the span, the efficiency just drops, way up, and you can really reduce that power requirement. I increased the surface area to 34 square metres. The main reason for that is that I wanted to make the simplest aeroplane I could, so it could be quickly built and constructed. So I kept a standard chord along the span of the wing. So that was a fairly happy number. It worked well in the power calculator here. You can see in the end here. So we've got a guesstimated weight, 28 metre wingspan, and the 34 square metre surface area. And the power output was only 326 watts. I have circled the faired fuselage there, as you can see. But you'll see later that it wasn't. I did hope to have that finished in time, but again, time restrictions got in the way. So that probably isn't that accurate, but I'd say around about the 400 watts required to sustain flight. So that's just carrying on going. So we could have achieved some real distance. Control surface improvements. Obviously, the first were not very desirable. New tail boom design to get around the flex. Aerodynamic improvements. Improved wing bracing. With increased span, we had to up the wing bracing. And increase power output, which brings me on to Mr. Scott Wallace. Really good friend of mine, but I'll let him speak.
Hello everyone, my name's Scott and I'm a 30-year-old aerospace engineer from Bristol. I've known Sam Penny since we were school friends together, and when he told me he was doing the Birdman project, I couldn't help but resist. I've actually had an involvement in the Birdman project since my parents did it in the 1970s, and I did it in 2010 as part of my university degree. Since then, the rules have changed. We are unlimited on wingspan in the Da Vinci class, for example, and that means the option of pedal power, which we looked at in 2010 and decided was unreliable and unrealistic with the 10-metre wingspan, was an achievable target. So that's how, when Sam asked me to take part and asked me to be the pilot, I said yes. So I hope you're all having fun and enjoying Sam's presentation, and I will probably see you all there this year. Sam's building a new one, I believe, and I've taken on the scrap from last year. Well, it wasn't too bad, actually, and I plan on rebuilding it and entering it slightly differently. So I'll see you all there.
I hope you all heard that okay. He's currently travelling around Australia, so I think he was in quite a noisy bar when he recorded that. So basically what he was alluding to is I asked him to be pilot. He has got a massive back history in cycling. He used to be semi-professional. He was power tested, and he can maintain about 400 watts for nearly 10 minutes. So I was more than happy that he was the guy to do it. 400 watts for 10 minutes is almost 2 kilometres. So that 2 kilometre mark was in grasp, and I would have been more than happy for him to run away with the medals. That would have been more than happy. As long as I built the thing that got him there, not a problem. So I won't read all of this. I'm sure you've had a bit of a skim read. He's actually chartered with yourselves. So there we go. Right, in the past, he entered a 2010 Worthing Birdman as part of his final university project. Just some of the images here. He did crash and burn a little bit. Apparently he lost pitch control before he jumped off, and it all went very wrong. But we actually met at secondary school. We were both part of a green power team, which is a competition for electric cars. We raced around Goodwood Racecourse. He was chief engineer while he was there. He's a few years older than me. As soon as he left school, I stepped into his shoes and became chief engineer. So we had a lot in common. We bounced off each other a lot, so I knew we worked well together. So he was the perfect guy to bring on board and really drive the project forward. So, Zephyrus II, the wing, which is substantially different from Zephyrus I. Changed the aerofoil. Dataless, that aircraft that holds the current distance record. I robbed it off them, in a word. They had several different airfoils, all designed on X-foil. I think X-foil was developed for them. So this was the center of their wing, the thickest cord, if you like. So I stuck with that, fairly similar. It worked fantastically. 20 metre span, I've gone into that. So the actual construction material, Gorilla Glue, of all things. You can get it in any hardware store. Fantastic stuff. I had been investing in very expensive epoxy resin, having to mix it perfectly, weigh it, get it perfectly right. This stuff is about 4 times as strong, and all you have to do is spray water on it. Absolutely fantastic. So that really helped the build as well, because you epoxy something, you have to leave it overnight to cure off. You have to give it a good old 6 hours to really harden. With the Gorilla Glue, it's about half an hour, and then you're good to crack on and continue with the build. So if you have to jig something, you can jig many more items. So I kept with a modular build. Instead of having the few sections I had in the first one, I've got 7 sections of 4 meters. Now I reduced the section size. They were 4.5 in the previous build because I was a bit tight on space the first time round. So I thought that extra 50 centimeters will really give me an additional storage area and more room to maneuver these things. But I was wrong. It was still a bit of a squeeze. The middle 3. So these 3 sections here, the centre section is just here. They had a secondary spar in them. So that's to try and get around that trailing edge compression I talked about earlier. So that spar did take up that compressive load fantastically. It really did work very well. And I also capped the leading edge here. This leading edge material is very thin foam. I did look into getting Depron. I got quoted on it, and it was an astronomical price. I then tried to think hard, long and hard about what I was going to use, because I was a bit stuck. And then I went into Wix again, and I found some hardwood underlay. And that stuff is near on identical to Depron, and it's a lot cheaper. So I just used that, and it worked absolutely fantastically. And we're going into the skin. I said it was 125 micron, 150 and 125. This year was 23 micron. So a lot thinner and a lot lighter. So the wing itself probably weighed about the same as the first one, even though it was a lot bigger. So going into that leading edge I talked about, I had to make up a former. So I just had a bit of bent aluminium around a wood frame. You tuck the foam in there, heat it with a heat gun underneath, and it forms this lovely leading edge. It was a bit time consuming, because obviously I had to make 28 of them. But yeah, it worked absolutely fantastically. And I'm very happy with that. Even the top end guys that I've seen in the aircraft, they're not that dissimilar. So in terms of what you can do in a garage with very little tooling and money, I was more than happy. So, a couple of videos here of how I made the ribs. So the best way of producing them I found was in a jig, as you'd expect. But the router was the best finish by far. It was a quick cut, and it did leave a nice clean edge. I tried a bit of running a knife around the edge, but it did really cut into it, and it didn't leave a very nice finish. So the router was the best option. And it also allowed me to keep this standard size. As I said, it's standard chord from root to tip. I kept this standard aerofoil shape, so every rib was cut with that one jig. But I used a different jig on locator pins to cut the tapering spars as they went out, which allowed me to be very flexible, and I could just make a new jig if I needed to change one set of ribs to the other. I had to reinforce the outer ones, you can see here, with the paper and PVA glue reinforcing. That was purely because you didn't have a secondary spar, and any torsional loads had to be translated just through the styrofoam. So I reinforced that. This video here on the right is a walk around of the wing trestle. This is how I stored the wing when I wasn't working on it. And it went into the garage when I wasn't in there, and it came out when I was trying to work on it. And it actually fits perfectly into my transportation trailer. So it served its purpose very well. As you can see, it's very big. So you can see all of the reinforced outer ribs there. So the fuselage and boom. I said about the flex in Mark 1 boom that we had, the issues with that. That was totally addressed with this fantastic addition from Scott. Fishing rods. We employed carbon fishing rods. And for the price and effort that he went through to build that, it's fantastic. It did work pretty well. I'll put you, just a comparison here with the new one compared to the Mark 1 here. Thank you for my beautiful assistant, my dog there. You can see in this one here, obviously it's a lot taller. That's to accommodate the additional span. We had to make it taller to keep the angle of the guy lines fairly healthy. If we make it any shorter, that angle would have become more and more acute, and the tension would have gone up and up. Because we worked out at 1.2 G, you're talking about 700 kilos per cable, when it was getting a bit ridiculous. And we also, this rear support here, we did counter forward slightly. That was because in the Mark 1, we did have a bit of flex in this top bar. So we brought this forward between the main and secondary spar, and that took all of the lift load on that trailing line. And Scott having a nice sit down there. So the control surfaces themselves, thank you, Chris, for this one. On his website, he's got a nice, simple guide, calculations to guess a fairly decent control surface area size. So we went with that, and it did work fantastically well, because they did come out very nicely. Just take note for future reference, I'll come back to this, the size of the rudder there. The way we made it so that the center sections, so that this section here and this section here were permanently affixed to the boom. That way you only had to slide on the outer sections of the control surfaces on the day. It made the setup nice and easy. The push-pull rods were already set in. You didn't have to fiddle around with nuts and bolts. You just had to slide them on there. And that worked really well, and I'm going to carry that on, I think. So we used push-pull rods instead of the control cables, aluminium push-pull rods. They were a little bit heavy, but the actual authority and sensitivity of the controls was absolutely fantastic. You could move them a fraction of a millimetre with fairly good accuracy. And obviously utilising the carbon tubing. So we kept with the fishing rods on the control surfaces, and they work very well. The fishing rods were very good, a lot lighter than the aluminium or the last one we had. So the propeller itself is actually the same frame that I used before. So the same aluminium tube sections. I made up new ribs. There was very little damage on the first one, mainly because when I hit the water the first time, all of the ribs broke off the tube and it auto-feathered when I hit the water, so there was no load on it, so it didn't take too much of a wallop. I've obviously filled the leading edge there with the styrofoam and just sanded it back, as you can see in this video. That came out fantastically. I'm sure I had more efficiency there because the initial one was purely just wrapped in the mylar, and it wasn't exactly perfect. This one, we had to reduce the pitch slightly because of the reduced flying speed of the Zephyrus II. We reduced the pitch slightly, which brought the efficiency up by 5%. But we also marked it down to 450 watts as well. If you push harder, you'll just overspeed slightly, and the efficiency is reduced a bit, but you gain additional power. So I was happy to keep 450 watts as a baseline to work off of as the most efficient point. And the fixed tensioner. We had issues on the pier on the Mark I aircraft. We got up there, all the film crew were filming us, we were all ready to go, all the pressure was there, and we had windmilling horrendously. I took the lock pin out the prop, it windmilled, put load on the slack side of the chain, stretched the tensioning spring, and it all fell off right on the pier with 8,000 people watching. So it wasn't ideal. So I stuck with a fixed tensioner this time. I ended up having to run up the pier with a bit of locking wire and just tie that down, and it stayed on the first go. But this one I was much happier with. The chain run and the actual prop finish itself was absolutely fantastic. Stayed with the bicycle chain. As I said, that worked very well, so I kept it. So we've had a few issues during the build itself. We decided to assemble it. There's a small patch of grass you can see here, just down on my road. I was limited for space, so I had to sort of accommodate that. And we put the wing section together for the first time. So it all went together quite nicely, no mishaps as such. We were setting up the guy lines, top and bottom, and as we erected it, you can see here the fuselage on its side. This is how we planned to assemble it on the pier. So you build the wing on ground level, set up this upper guy line here with the wing post, and lift with that rolling up like that, and it'll all sit nicely on top. The wing itself would sit 2.3 meters up in the air, so you couldn't even touch it when it's up. So it was quite enormous. We got it up there, it held for a few minutes, and then we had a slight gust of wind, and it bent this main wing post. And you don't even see the damage here too clearly. It smashed a bit of the leading edge. There was a mount just here, and it did quite a bit of damage, and it did knock my confidence a little bit. I'm not going to lie, it was a hell of a bang, and the wing drooped down to its sort of at rest position. So we had to make improvements there, and you can see them in this one here. So the wing post, we went. I wasn't going to muck about. This was too close to D-Day. We upped the gauge of the material substantially, and also put a solid tail brace in there, and that didn't break at all. That was fantastic. So, little video here for you. So as you can see, we're very near completion there. This was only a week or so before the jump, so we were pretty tight against it again with time. What you will notice is the rudder, and we haven't got the upper rudder on, and I wish we had done. I wish that day we had stuck that rudder on and seen what would happen, because I'll go into later, but I was really not very happy with the consequence of that. But everything else worked very well. We set the guidelines nicely. We had a bit of an issue with the drive clipping there, so that did expose that. So it was a good thing we did. But again, it was only a light breeze that day, and we had real issues trying to hold it down. With that 33 square metres and that nice, smooth leading edge, it was really ready to go. And then on the 25th, with 18 days to go, I got this email. And I'll wrap it up for you. In the absence of a major sponsor this year, we regret that the 2017 International Bognor Birdman has had to be cancelled. So as you can imagine my disappointment, my utter, well, the bottom fell out of my world, basically. This machine that I'd been slaving over for the past 6 months just wasn't gonna fly. Or if it did fly, it wouldn't fly at the event that it was meant to fly at. I thought it was a nice touch as well. Sent by iPhone. Yeah, cheers, guys. Thanks for letting us know. So, following this, there was a bit of a public outcry and shock that so close to D-Day, it was cancelled. So, we didn't want to take this line down. We really pushed back, and my partner Emily really stepped up, took over the social media side, was calling businesses, local businesses, trying to drum up sponsorship. We got hold of the sponsors, and we drilled down that we needed £10,000. Just £10,000 to get the event back on. They had all the other things sorted, just the £10,000. It's quite a lot of money, but I thought if everyone chipped in, we could get there. So my partner Emily managed to raise £4,000 in the first 2 days of her efforts, just from local businesses and other corporations trying to chip in, help out. £400 here, £500 there, every little helps. We said that we would forego the £1,000 prize money if we were to win. So that was, again, knocked another £1,000 off. We had a lot of media coverage in regards to it, trying to push back and get the event back on. I've got a little snippet here from South Today.
A last-minute campaign has been underway to save, well, the famous Bognor Birdman Competition. It features, of course, entrants launching themselves off the town's pier in an attempt to fly. Well, organisers announced on Monday that they were cancelling this year's event because of a lack of sponsorship. Following a public outcry, the race was on to plug the funding shortfall. Bridie Leyland has the story.
It's an eccentric endeavour which has been attracting entrants and spectators since the 1970s. The Bognor Birdman Competition rewards those who can fly the furthest using only human power. Keeping the event safe is expensive, with divers and rescue boats to be paid for. This year, the organisers couldn't secure a major sponsor. They announced the event would be cancelled, but there was a public outcry, and now the race is on to plug the funding gap.
I didn't expect this overwhelming flurry of activity and sadness that it was not happening. And I'm delighted that people do love Birdman. I love Birdman, and hopefully with the community behind us, it will happen this year.
But there's nothing definite at the moment. You still need to raise that money.
Until we've got that £7,000 pledged to us, yes, it can't happen, because I can't just let people fly off the pier, not having a plan of how I'm going to rescue them.
One person who's watching on anxiously is the pilot and designer of this craft, the Zephyrus, which flew 35.5 metres last year.
I was fine, by the way.
So here it is.
Zephyrus Mark II, there's a lot of it. Aircraft engineer Sam Penny has been working hard on Mark II, which has a 28-metre wingspan. With just 3 weeks to go, he can hardly believe the competition may not go ahead.
I've worked for a year getting this thing ready for 2 weeks from now, and I'm gutted, to say the least. I've invested so much of myself in this project, it'd be devastating not to see it fly.
For several years, Worthing ran its own Birdman competition. That folded last year. A final decision on whether Bognor's Birdman will happen will be taken tomorrow. With crowdfunding and renewed appeals for sponsorship, the hope is the community here will ride to the rescue. Bridie Leyland, BBC South Today, Bognor Regis.
Well, we can reveal some good news for fans of that event, because after seeing a report on our breakfast bulletins this morning, a sponsor has come forward to put up the remaining cash. It's the toilet paper manufacturer Cheeky Panda. So Bognor Birdman will be going ahead after all on the weekend of the 12th and the 13th of August. Yes, rather appropriate if you're jumping off the end of a pier, I'd say.
So I don't know if you caught that last bit, but they did find a sponsor after running that South Today campaign. Cheeky Panda, the toilet paper manufacturer, stepped forward and plugged the funding gap, and everyone was walking around with silly panda hats on the whole time. So it worked out pretty well. We managed to get it back on. Very, very relieved, as you can imagine. So the Saturday came around, and I was all ready to throw my lovely creation into the sea and be rid of it, because it had taken over my life for the past 6 months. So we got there, we set up. This isn't quite full span. I think this is limited span you're looking at there. And the weather conditions were not ideal. They started off quite nicely. We got there and the wind was blowing about 7 knots, and then the gusts started to kick in, and we soon realised that it wasn't going to happen. It was far, far too windy to even attempt to move it, let alone try and throw it off the end of a pier. So unfortunately, we did have to pack it all away again and take it home, which I wasn't too happy about. But on the Sunday, the conditions were far better. It's still a little bit too windy, because there's a hell of a surface area there. And at CL Max, there's a lift potential of 350 kilos. So that's 3 full-grown men lifted off the floor. So even if there was a handling error, there's quite a risk there to people's sort of well-being, if you like. So I'll show you the video. You can see how we do. I'd like to get your feedback afterwards and see what you think went wrong. This is the best video I could find of the event. It's not the official video. It's some person from the beach, but it's a very good angle. So you might hear some people on the beach, but it's a very good video. Gives you some idea of the size. I counted up afterwards and we had 11 people on the pier with us trying to help move it.
Zephyrus II, human-powered machine. Absolutely wonderful. Making its way just about to start. So up the land, leading on to the launch platform. Scott Wallace is the pilot. He's a professional cyclist. This was designed and built by Sam Kenny, Aeronautical Engineering Captain. Here it comes. This is what we've been waiting for. But a bit more information. Scott, who is the pilot, works with Sam Kenny. Scott is not a pilot. He's a pilot. He's going, he's going, he's going, he's going. He's going, he's flying, he's flying, he's going, and he's gone. He was doing really, really well. That was magnificent. He's up, he's up, he's got his hand up.
So it flew, which is the main thing.
I really thought he was going to go there.
So any ideas on what went wrong there? I'd be interested to see what you guys make of it.
You were nose down right at the beginning.
Nose down?
The blade incidence is probably slightly wrong.
Okay. Yeah. Anybody else? Why he crashed it in the sea? So, my take on that is, aircraft-wise, seeing as it was guesswork, fairly good. Nothing broke on that. Nothing caused it to plummet in the sea. The biggest issue there was overspeed. So we'll go back again because it's a good video anyway. We'll fast forward a little bit. The issues I saw on that was he took a dive off the end, failed to pull up in time, which I can't blame Scott for. And I'm not sure not many people are qualified to fly a human-powered aircraft off a pier. But in the overspeed, the propeller was flinging around far faster than it should have been, and all of his efforts were concentrated on trying to control his technique at that cadence. I think looking back, it was around about 160 RPM cadence, which is astronomical. You can't maintain that. So had to put a bit of stick back on it, it would have picked up a little bit. He scrubbed that additional airspeed, the prop would have fallen into its efficient range, and I think it would have been a more successful flight. We did achieve around about 38 metres, so we did beat last year's flight, but we're not on time. Last year's flight was 8 seconds, and this year's was 5 seconds. So he hit the deck harder than me, but he did get a little bit further. So I was happy that it flew, obviously. I was a little bit disappointed in how long it flew for and the distance it achieved. So I did walk away a little bit disappointed. Obviously, you can see the dihedral there. I'm sure that's, for those of you who don't know, the amount of flex in the wing. That was a guesstimation. So it was a lot, but more stability is better than less. So here you go. You can see the overspeed. You see how fast he's trying to pedal. Yeah, unfortunate. Put on a great show for everyone to come to see it, though. There were about 8,000 people on the beach, coming happy to see us. So, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from it? Yes, I spent 6 months building it and it only achieved 5 seconds of flight, but it's always a lesson to be learned. So, I'd say the biggest one that I should have really taken into account, needed a test flight. Not only for the aircraft setup, but also for the pilot training, just to get a feel for how things are going to respond when you put an input in. Because 5 seconds isn't long enough to know how to fly a machine. Also, I've already mentioned it was far too big, 11 people to position it. And the tail boom, the thing that I thought was absolutely fantastic, on the day didn't perform particularly well. You'll notice, remember earlier on I said to take note of how large the rudder was? We're missing a bit off the top here. That should be another 2 sections higher, so it's currently half its upper size. That's because very, very poor torsional strength in this. Had I put the top rudder on when we did that test assemble on the grass, I would have immediately identified it. It had no torsional strength, and any more surface area above that central point would have just completely snapped the back end off. So on the day, with the slight gusting winds, it was a real concern that that was going to fail. But it didn't. It held together, and it flew for as long as it flew. I've got to walk away happy, but not necessarily fulfilled, as I hoped I would be. So what is next for me in this bizarre venture that I'm doing, bizarre hobby I have? There's definitely going to be a Zephyrus II. Having come so close to doing a real decent distance. I mean, some would argue that 38 metres is a decent distance, but I really want to impress people and set some insane 2-kilometre distance. So I think Zephyrus III, although I've started dabbling in the construction, I've got some other projects on the go at the moment, so it's taking a bit of a backseat, but it will be ready for next year. It's going to be somewhere in between Zephyrus I and Zephyrus II. It's definitely going to be smaller than Zephyrus II. It's far too much surface area. For an event like this, where you can't have predictable airspeeds, and you're flying in the middle of the day, which is also one of the windiest time of the day. So I'll definitely bring the surface area down. I'll keep a similar span, I think. But they're all things to look forward and try and plan for. A bit more planning, I think, is required. But beyond Bognor Birdman and Zephyrus itself, the Kramer prizes, there are still 3 up for grabs, 2 of which are potentials. The marathon, you've got to achieve a 26.2 miles in under an hour over a figure of 8 course. I think in the right up there's also a hurdle in the middle, a 10-metre hurdle you've got to clear every time. But that is incredibly hard to achieve, the marathon. That's why no one's done it before. Currently, the airspeed record for a human-powered aircraft is 27 miles an hour. So that's an incredibly fine line. You'd have to be almost breaking the world speed record for an hour to achieve that prize. So I think a lot has got to happen before I'm there, but it was definitely something to look forward to and a goal to focus upon. There's also the sporting aircraft challenge, which I don't think I'd be too interested, even though it's double the money. It's a lot harder to achieve. You've got to create a machine that can be used in sporting events. People could fly against each other, and there's not much glory in that. I'll be much happier with the marathon. Project Aeolus. This is a project that me and Scott have sort of fathomed up. On the British Human Powered Flying Club website, they have a record board of all of the world records and British records achieved in human powered flight. And although aircraft have done more than the 1 kilometre it states, I don't believe they've been recorded to have done that. So it would be nice for a British aircraft to achieve some insane distance, like 20 kilometres, for example, which is very achievable with human-powered. So that would be Project Aeolus. We are really looking forward to getting stuck into that. After Zephyrus II, I think this is the next step for me and Scott. We're really going to focus on moving ahead with that. And that is the end of my presentation. Anybody got any questions? Any burning desire you want to ask me? Far away.
Did you ever consider making a scale model before you built it?
No, should have done.
And not that I'm an aerodynamist, that extreme, well, not extreme, that dihedral, if that was not as much as that, would that actually make any difference?
Well, not a vast amount of difference, but you would indeed. So his question, if no one heard him there, with the dihedral, with the extreme dihedral, if that was reduced slightly, would it make any difference? It's a good question. I don't know if it would make a huge amount of difference. You definitely lose a little bit of stability, though I think you've got more than you need there. But the thing is, when you gain dihedral, you lose effective span. So I think by bringing it down a bit, you do gain a small amount of efficiency. And when you're talking about the power outputs that we're talking about, every little bit helps. I would have liked to have seen that a little bit reduced, maybe a metre or two at the tip coming down slightly. But it wasn't an issue. It didn't stop it flying. But a little bit flatter would have been ideal.
And the rudders, if you had 2 rudders rather than 1, would that make a difference? Although you're dealing with weight if you
Yeah, absolutely. I looked into various configurations, twin prop, twin control surface, and the lightest way of doing it is, as you see there, a lot of the very top end, like the Daedalus project, the NASA-funded one, they have got a very similar setup to this, just forward prop, single control surface. So I tried to copy what works, really, because I'm not smart enough to come up with a better idea. Go ahead.
Have you considered spending a bit more time on the power plant, because this is basically a cycling exercise?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I am in training for Zephyrus III now. I knew it was an issue with Zeph 1, but I think it was more of a case of getting it built the first time round and proving the machine rather than the man. In Zeph 2, that was a big concern of mine, and that is the main contributing factor to why I went for Scott as the pilot. He could really kick out the watts, whereas I didn't have a chance. And weight-wise, we were basically the same. But I think I can definitely drop my weight substantially for Zeph 3 and up my total output. Any other questions? Oh, sorry.
Going back to your film.
I'll come back to you, sorry.
Going back to your film, there appeared to be about 20 to 30 degrees of crosswind. I think you should be really proud. I think the control in that sort of crosswind looks very good, to be honest with you.
Oh, thank you.
And the fin, you didn't break the fin off. The fin appeared to cope with that. You don't appear to be unduly crabbing. No. So I think you got the thing quite right, to be honest, in directional sense. Looks good. The windsock was about 30 degrees from the left.
Yeah, and we didn't launch square. We did launch into wind.
You launched crosswind.
Yeah, you are limited on the actual platform. They have guardrails either side. So with the guy lines and positioning, as we threw it off the end there, we had to hold the guy lines up just to clear the last tip of barrier.
Yeah, with that crosswind, I'd be very proud.
Yeah, we were quite lucky on the day, I think. Any other questions?
I'm not sure whether you've tried it or you mentioned it. Did you not do a fast taxi run on a disused runway and test your takeoff speed and whatnot first? We had every intention of doing that. On Chris Roper's website, he actually gives you a rundown of what you should be looking for in each test run eventuality. So over 3 runs, what you should actually look for initially and then set up and then change as you go as a progressive improvement. We had a runway set up, ready to go, or at least happy to accommodate us. Unfortunately, it was the time factor again. We were just a little bit slow
on the ball at the end there. If I'd had an extra month, we definitely would have test flown it. But when it comes down to the last week, high-speed taxi does hold enormous risk of damage, and had something broken irreparably, say we dropped a tip and it did a ground roll, spun around its tip on the ground, and we did some horrendous damage, there wouldn't have been time to repair that. So I think my cautious side took over in that respect, and we decided not to go ahead with a test flight, or, as you say, high-speed taxi, just to get a little hop out of it. Again, it would have been ideal, and Zephyrus III, hopefully, we will definitely get some test flights in, because that's the biggest thing, I think, causing all of these crashes. I mean, I've not got past 40 metres, and I think with appropriate testing and setup of these aircraft, I mean, even the Zeph 1, set up correctly, could have done 150 metres, I think. So, yes, as you say, test flight, it would be everything. Anybody else? Great, well, thank you very much for inviting me here to share this with you. Yeah, I hope to see you next year.
From across the globe, from the centre of aerospace. And now to you.
Thank you for downloading from the Royal Aeronautical Society. If you enjoyed this content, please consider showing your support for the Society. Share a link to this presentation by email or on your favourite social networks. If you have an interest in aerospace, consider the professional and personal benefits of membership. Visit www.aerosociety.com.